Hey everyone, Jonathan here with Short Term Dojo. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the case study for the ownership route of short-term rentals. And I think what you're going to find in this video is it's probably my most passionate video out of the three. This is the path that I use because of its wealth generation possibilities. So the format will be similar to the other two paths. Yeah, I will break down your monthly expenses, the amount of typical cash flow you can make from a standard property, your capital requirements of money that you will need to acquire the asset and the upfront expenses, and then some of the pros and cons that I like to focus on in this path. It's not, again, not a holistic list, but you'll see some passion come out with the pros in this one. I think it's such a fantastic way to build wealth through appreciation, through cash flow, through principal payoffs. You'll see all that in this video. And I hope this educates you if you're considering picking up an asset. More to come on this, but I appreciate you watching and have a great day. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the ownership model of the short-term rental or Airbnb space, okay? And this one, to recap, again, it's where you physically actually own the asset itself by whatever it is that you're looking to run, a house, apartment, townhome, whatever the case may be. And this one is my personal favorite. I love a lot of the different benefits you get out of this. I call it the empire builder, if you will, because I always love owning assets, owning them outright, and having the ability to have multiple options while generating wealth and cash flow. So two different things, right? Cash flow is one thing. It's a point in time. It's how successful you are in at that moment when it comes to having cash flow come your way. But then there's a wealth generation effect of actually owning an asset and seeing the valuation grow over time. Okay. So as we're looking at this, again, we're going to start with the 4,500 standard from a revenue perspective, but let's talk a little bit about some of the the operating expenses monthly. Okay. Just a tad, and I'll talk about it down here, but if we're going to look here, we're going to use a standard mortgage of $1,500. Again, just a typical amount. And this is comparable to the lease video, the rental arbitrage video, where we had a $1,500 lease payment. But I'll tell you what's a little bit different here from a benefit perspective in a minute. We're going to have $250 in utilities because, again, you're going to be responsible for all the costs, the mortgage, utilities, insurance, everything like that. We have supplies here of $75, again, a standard amount, and insurance. Again, I want to highlight here, short-term rental insurance is what you're looking for here. There are a couple of different businesses that offer that. It's not mainstream quite yet, but I will be doing a video on that as well, just to get you familiar with that and not relying on owner's insurance or landlord dwelling policy. This is going to be designed to help put you in a good position of protection when using your asset to run as an Airbnb. And here again, I've talked about this a couple of times, a tech stack. It's optional at this point when you're just getting started, but it does cover things like having a communication software that you want to sign up for, maybe eventually a property management software to manage all your properties as you grow, or even the one, maybe a pricing software, which I highly recommend. And I will do a video on that as well to talk about some of the ones out there. There's a lot of ones out there, but that is one of the better investments you can make over time, especially as you grow your portfolio, because what that will do is essentially monitor your pricing. And we'll get more into that in another video, but it's another example of what you could throw on that tech stack. Again, $50, not required up front, but you could potentially go up or down with depending on how many things you sign up for. Okay, so this is a similar type of financial situation as the master lease scenario, where you're making $4,500, you have $2,000 in expenses, but here's where it gets a little bit different. This is not actual cash flow in the month that you will see, but it's the first huge benefit of equity and appreciation and actual wealth going back into your pocket. Okay, so we're actually going to add the $200 in principal here. And again, this is an arbitrary number of what the interest or the principal of each mortgage payment would be. We're just throwing in $200 here. So in the master lease, you'd have a $1,500 rent payment where that goes to a landlord, that goes to somebody else. That's somebody else's wealth mechanism. In this case, $200 of that $1,500 is principal. So you're not seeing that in cash flow because it is going to the bank at that time, but it is reducing the principal of what you owe on that asset. So again, huge benefit number one of $200 additional dollars. Okay, so in this case, you're wrapping up the month with a $2,500 cash flow, $2,700 because of that $200 principal as actual equity that goes back into your pocket. So first big benefit there. If we talk about the initial investment, this is where people probably get overwhelmed because depending on their financial situation, they may seem a little bit overwhelmed and intimidated by the amount of money that you do have to come up with to acquire the asset. I want to stress that I think it's worth it to, if you're going to go in this direction, do whatever you can to save money and put it aside to invest. I think some of the other options are absolutely good to get started, but owning a several Airbnbs outright, I think is a fantastic thing to do. But in this case, again, I understand it's overwhelming, the amount of money that is required to get into this. So with this, I used the down payment, a 20% standard down payment on an arbitrary $300,000 home. Okay. So you're looking at about $60,000 to acquire the asset. The furniture here is going to be about 10 to 15K. Again, that can go up or down. Most likely it might even be higher than that because a $300,000 home, I guess it depends on your market. Maybe it could be a studio in some places. It could be a 4-bedroom in some places. So here you're going to have 10 to 15K. The due diligence, this is again an arbitrary number, but what I'm talking about here is when you go to buy the property, here's where the risk comes into play, and you're actually taking ownership of this. To actually acquire the asset, you're going to want to do things like a survey, an inspection, appraisal, things that aren't necessarily part of your down payment, but you want to make sure you're doing all the due diligence and ensuring that there's nothing wrong with the property when you acquire it, or you're mitigating that as much as possible heading into the actual acquisition. You know what's going on with the property. So $1,500 is going to cover, it's an arbitrary number that'll cover several of those things. So you're going to want to account for that as well. And then photos I have in all of the videos as well, just because, again, to me, it's one of the most important things that you're not going to want to leave out. You absolutely want to invest in professional photos. So you're talking about $75,000, maybe $78,000, give or take, to get involved. And I know that sounds like a lot of money. Again, this is using a $300,000 home. It doesn't have to be that. You can shoot a little bit smaller. You might not pull in the $4,500 right away, but I think it's my favorite way to start building an empire, if you will, and acquiring assets over time. And I'll talk about why I feel that way with the pro section here. Okay, so control. I've talked about this in my other videos. This gives you complete control, right? So you own the asset. You decide what you need to upgrade the homes. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can make improvements. You can do painting. You can upgrade things. You can do whatever it is to increase the experience, which ultimately will start generating more revenue. So you have complete control up here outside of any local regulations where they may say, hey, you're no longer allowed to do short-term rentals. Wealth generation. It's no secret that real estate in and of itself, outside of short-term rentals, whatever niche that you have, real estate is an absolute huge wealth generator for some of the wealthiest people in the country. And it actually, which I have a huge passion about, is a financial freedom generator for your average person. Just to acquire a little bit of real estate, get a little bit of cash flow, especially in the short-term rental market, being in that business, wealth generator, and really gives you freedom and flexibility as that cash flow each month increases. So it's a huge wealth generator because you actually own an asset for yourself. Equity here. This is, again, you put 60, here's the thing, you put 60 down on the down payment, $300,000 house, you don't lose that money, right? I get it. It feels like you cut a check and you give it to somebody else, you give it to a bank or the owner that you're purchasing it from, and it feels like it's gone. Remember, it's not gone. Okay, I understand that things absolutely can happen. You buy a $300,000 house and a recession hits, or 2008 hits again, and prices plummet, and now the house is worth $250,000, and you feel like it's gone. But remember, if you put yourself in a position to not ever have to sell in a bad environment, that money is not gone. Over the long haul, that money will return itself and it will increase in value. Okay, so again, equity here, you put 60 down, that's still yours. Okay, you have that equity. It might not be liquid in the immediate future, but that is value that you have. So that money's absolutely yours. Appreciation. Again, this is where the empire builder comes up. You buy the $300,000 home, in 5 years, it's worth $365,000, and you've been paying down the principal. Okay, so your principal is going down, the amount you owe is going down. You have that original 60 you put down, and now it's worth 60, 65. Okay, so that's appreciation. These four here alone, control, wealth generation, equity, and appreciation, to me, makes this a really smart choice to slowly build a mini little empire for yourself in real estate. Real estate taxes. Okay, so in this case, you've seen some of the other videos where I put it on the cons list. You didn't have access to this, but real estate in and of itself, Again, disclaimer, not giving tax advice. So I suggest you talk to a CPA or a strong tax strategist. But the real estate, you will have real estate tax deductions and things that you can include in your strategy at play here, which is very misunderstood for your average investor on how powerful that is to negate what you will owe in taxes going forward and the ability to regenerate money to invest again in the future. Business taxes, again, you'll be most likely starting a business here. There's an opportunity to include that in your tax strategy, which is a huge benefit here. Leverage is, and this is, let's go back to my example where we're talking about the appreciation in a couple of years. You buy this property at 300, it's now worth 365. Maybe you paid off a couple $1,000s through your principal payments, and now you actually have more than the 20% equity, right? Maybe now you have 35 or something. Okay, maybe you have 40. And the leverage is where you can now access, in some cases, right? There's tons of resources out there to help explain how to access equity in your home so that now you have monetary value to put towards a new investment. Okay, so the leverage here is huge. You don't have leverage in any of the other models. You can absolutely tap into at some point the equity that has grown over time. So that's a huge, huge benefit. Options. What I mean by this is, let's take what happened recently with the COVID scenario. When people were nervous about their short-term rentals being booked and the occupancy drops, we all kind of experienced a bunch of cancellations in March and April timeframe of 2020. But because you own this asset, you're probably, and in my case, we had this option available to us of, let's say, forbearance. Okay, it wasn't a sexy option because it essentially puts you in a position where you're claiming that you can't pay, right? But it was almost like a lifeline that you knew the government was going to step in to essentially give landlords and asset owners some options with the banks should they not be able to pay their mortgage. Okay, in this case, forbearance, it was a 3-month gap of paying so that you can make sure your business was still in good shape and make sure that we recovered. And naturally, we did. A lot of us did, outside of some of the states where they shut down permanently. But in this case, it gave us an option to halt payments because we own the asset and we were responsible for the mortgage, if you will, the mortgage. We could potentially stop the payment, make sure we weren't going to bleed too badly, gave us a little bit of breathing room, and then got back in there, and everything played out just fine. Another option would potentially be that you, again, can tap into some of the leverage. It gives you an asset that you can leverage to invest in more real estate, to acquire and build your portfolio. There's other options now that you own an asset. There are many, many different ways that you can leverage that asset and go in different paths to help your financial plan come to fruition. So some of the cons here, scaling is an obvious one. I'm going to couple that with the second bullet here, which is it's very expensive. So unless you're completely made of money or you're running a syndication or you have a boatload of money, you're just not going to be able to scale too fast. And I actually, even if you have a ton of cash, I think you should go through your deals very strategically, one by one, to make sure that they check all the boxes that you've put in place for your investment strategy. But again, you're not going to be able to scale very quickly, and it's very, very expensive to get started. Risk. This is the riskiest option by far. You own the asset. You're responsible for everybody going in and out of it. You're responsible for the insurance. You're responsible for all the expenses. CapEx, they call it, which is capital expenditures, the roof, the HVAC, foundation, siding, paint, everything. It's on you. Let's say in one case recently we had a $4,000 bill to trim trees and make sure that they're safe. So again, the entire piece of property as well as the land, you're responsible for everything. And everybody going in and out of it, the buck stops with you in terms of a risk perspective. So that's going to be a big one. And then regulatory concerns. Regulatory concerns are a risk for every other method that I've said because it can sort of shut you down. But in this case, it's almost a bigger risk because you now own the asset. Now, I do recommend you specifically buying an asset to run short-term rentals. I know that that's what we're talking about here, and that's what we want to bake a pro forma around or a scenario analysis around. But I think you should assess the ability of potential appreciation as well as a long-term rental. So if you're going to get killed on if you were to put this property online as a long-term rental, I would suggest not necessarily considering that. And that again is to combat the regulatory concerns. When you have a master lease, you might have a year lease left and you can bail on that, right? It might cost you some money, but that's the extent of your risk exposure. And if you're co-hosting, even better. You can say, hey, we just got to shut this down and no more money for me, no more percentage, I'm gone, right? There's no risk. With this, you now have this asset, you have all this money involved, and if you can't cash flow on it and you can't leverage that property in a way that will make you pay your bills in a tough scenario, then they shut you down. That's all your option. That's the only option you've baked out. That's going to be a problem. So again, this is my favorite option. It's what we're doing at the moment. I think you have so many wealth generational options with this path. But again, it's the slowest to get going. It's probably out of reach for your average person that wants to just get in the ring. But if you have any questions on how to potentially tap into finding money, getting some help with certain types of lenders, I'll be glad to help you out with there. I have some relationships with a lot of them. I don't suggest or think that there's too many options with zero money down, but there is programs to help avoid maybe a 20% down scenario. But this is my favorite. It really is, in my opinion, an empire builder. So again, please, if you have any questions, just drop them down below. Jonathan Basilio here, creator and founder of Short Term Jojo. I hope you have a great day and thanks for listening.